Reality is only an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. Albert Einstein. What if the version of you living right now isn't the real you, just the lowest layer of a system designed to limit your power? What if the world you're trying to survive was engineered as a test, not a home? And what if every thought, emotion, and coincidence has been pointing you toward the one level where humans stop being ordinary? Keep your attention here. What comes next flips everything you've been taught about consciousness. Stage 1 often feels like a room built from expectations, routines, deadlines, and the constant pressure to survive. Everything appears solid and final, as if life were only a sequence of tasks. Awareness contracts until the body feels like the entire identity. The world becomes narrow, repetitive, predictable. Yet a quiet tension grows, hinting that something essential is being overlooked. In this stage, the senses dominate every decision. Pleasure must be chased, discomfort must be avoided, and reputation becomes a fragile shield against fear. Daily life becomes a loop of earning, reacting, and distracting. It becomes clear that this loop doesn't offer meaning, only temporary relief. Awareness starts to notice the heaviness beneath the routine. That noticing changes the texture of everything. The surrounding structures, school, culture, media, don't need manipulation. They simply reward numbness more than presence. Productivity is praised while inner depth is ignored. People stay busy enough to never feel themselves fully. But the moment a small pause happens, a different layer of experience reveals itself. That pause becomes the first fracture in the stage 1 illusion. And once it cracks, it cannot fully seal again. A shift happens when physical reality stops being interpreted as punishment and begins to look like training. Challenge becomes feedback. Effort becomes a signal of growth. The body reveals itself not as a limitation but as a precise instrument made of ancient particles, carrying the memory of stars. When this is seen, survival stops feeling like the purpose, and growth starts feeling like the point. The question emerges, what exactly is this training preparing someone for? The idea of being powerless dissolves the moment resistance is understood as a sculptor. Hard moments sharpen focus. Delays strengthen discipline. Constraints refine intention. It becomes obvious that stage 1 is not designed to shrink anyone, it is designed to strengthen capacity. Every pressure reveals a hidden strength. Awareness begins to wonder what becomes possible when that strength is recognized. Stage 1 loosens its grip the moment inner aliveness is noticed. One breath felt deeply reveals more than years of routine ever did. Sensation exposes a subtle watcher behind the body. The body is experienced, but something is experiencing. That tiny realization opens a quiet doorway. And once awareness turns toward that doorway, the early signals of stage 2 begin forming in the background. The first cracks in stage 1 appear quietly, through moments that don't fit the old worldview. A coincidence too precise. A thought that arrives before an event. A sudden stillness that changes how time feels. Awareness starts to notice these irregularities, even if the mind tries to dismiss them. Once these anomalies register, the sense of a sealed physical prison begins to weaken. Many try to explain these signals away, but something shifts when explanation stops satisfying. Life starts presenting patterns instead of randomness. Emotions gain texture. Silence gains depth. Reality feels thinner in certain places, almost porous. And in that subtle rearrangement, the sense of being only a body starts to loosen. Presence becomes the catalyst. When attention lands fully on the breath, something feels different. When heartbeat is felt without interference, a deeper layer of aliveness reveals itself. Sensations become more than sensations, they become entry points. The moment reveals that there is awareness of the body, not just the body. That distinction is small but transformative. As presence expands, time changes. Moments stretch, soften, or brighten unexpectedly. A sense of inner spaciousness appears beneath the usual noise. Awareness begins to register life not as a series of tasks, but as a continuous field. Inside that field, something subtle starts calling, something that isn't physical yet feels unmistakably real. It becomes clear that the edges of stage 1 are dissolving. The more presence stabilizes, the more reality begins responding differently. Coincidences cluster. Insights land faster. Emotions move more fluidly. The ordinary becomes strangely meaningful, as if a second layer of reality is sliding into view. Awareness starts to suspect that these glimpses are not accidents but invitations. Invitations to a different way of perceiving. When presence exposes the watcher behind the body, the old identity can no longer stand alone. A quiet question forms beneath experience. If awareness is observing matter, then what exactly is awareness? The question itself becomes a doorway, and that doorway opens directly into the beginning of stage 2. If this is hitting close to home, take a second, like the video, subscribe, and stay with me. What comes next goes even deeper. As the cracks widen, a new perception emerges. Reality no longer looks chaotic. Patterns begin appearing in places that once felt random: timing, emotions, relationships, even failures. It becomes clear that nothing is truly disconnected. Awareness recognizes a kind of underlying architecture, as if existence were following a quiet blueprint. And the moment this recognition lands, stage 2 begins. Nature becomes the first revelation. Spirals appear everywhere: shells, storms, galaxies, flowers, fingerprints. The golden ratio surfaces in bone structure, plant growth, and even in the way light falls. It becomes impossible to ignore the mathematical elegance behind everything. The world starts looking less like an accident and more like something intentionally coded. And that realization shifts identity itself. Awareness begins sensing that the same structure shaping the world is shaping the self. The line between out there and in here blurs. The symmetry of the cosmos doesn't feel distant, it feels familiar. A strange recognition appears, as if the pattern were remembering itself through the person seeing it. Stage 2 feels like waking up inside a design that was always present but previously invisible. This discovery is intoxicating because it expands the boundaries of what life means. Intuition sharpens. Synchronicities multiply. Emotions move with a different clarity. Reality feels responsive, almost conversational. Awareness starts noticing that questions attract answers, intentions influence outcomes, and perception shifts experience. But this new sensitivity also sets up the next challenge. As perception sharpens, the mind instinctively divides what it sees: light versus dark, ego versus spirit, good versus bad. Duality becomes the lens. And while the patterns reveal unity, interpretation still operates in separation. It becomes obvious that the mind wants to categorize more than it wants to understand. This creates the first major trap of stage 2, the temptation to reject one side of the polarity. This rejection creates fragmentation, not elevation. The moment one pole is labeled good and the other bad, consciousness becomes imbalanced again. Patterns stop flowing and start tightening. And that tightening is precisely what reveals the next turning point. Because the moment someone tries to ascend by division, the stage 2 trap appears, and it opens directly into topic 4. As stage 2 expands perception, the mind tries to keep up, but it often does so through division. Light becomes good, darkness becomes bad, and spiritual insight becomes a badge of superiority. Awareness starts splitting what was meant to be integrated. It becomes clear that the mind prefers labels over truth. And that preference quietly forms the stage 2 trap. When patterns are first recognized, there is a strong temptation to idealize one pole and demonize the other. High vibration versus low vibration, love versus ego, alignment versus shadow. Spirituality becomes a hierarchy instead of a journey. This creates internal pressure to stay positive at all costs. Yet the more one clings to the light, the more the shadow tightens beneath it. Avoiding shadow doesn't erase it, it amplifies it. Suppressed anger becomes heaviness. Rejected fear becomes anxiety. Ignored grief becomes emotional static. The attempt to live only in the higher pole fragments awareness instead of expanding it. Duality becomes a battlefield, not a teacher. And the harder someone tries to be pure, the more disconnected they feel. It becomes evident that polarity is not an enemy, it is a system. Hot and cold are one phenomenon at different speeds. Masculine and feminine are one life force expressing through different modes. Chaos is not the opposite of order, it is the space where new order forms. Darkness is not evil, it is potential. When this is seen, polarity stops being a trap and becomes a toolkit. Integration begins when both poles are allowed to exist without hierarchy. Light reveals direction, shadow reveals depth. Strength grows from navigating both, not choosing one. Awareness learns to hold contradiction without collapsing into judgment. This capacity changes everything. It marks the transition from pattern recognition to mental sovereignty. Once the stage 2 trap is seen clearly, a new tension forms, one that can't be resolved through spirituality alone. The mind itself begins to reveal its limitations. Thoughts, beliefs, and internal narratives rise to the surface like code wanting to be rewritten. And as soon as that code becomes visible, stage 3 starts calling. When polarity stops dominating perception, a new layer becomes visible, the mind's architecture. Thoughts are no longer seen as private noise, they start revealing themselves as signals shaping experience. Emotional patterns repeat with surprising precision. It becomes clear that reality reflects internal narratives with uncomfortable accuracy. And the recognition of this mirroring marks the beginning of stage 3. Awareness starts noticing how often automatic thoughts run the show. Old beliefs surface: I'm not enough, I don't deserve more, things never work for me. These scripts slip beneath consciousness, directing choices and reactions. The conscious mind tries to override them with positivity, but the deeper programming keeps broadcasting the opposite. The conflict between these layers becomes undeniable. This inner split explains why change often feels impossible. The conscious mind can visualize success, but the subconscious keeps rehearsing fear. One part of the system moves forward while the other pulls backward. It becomes obvious that the strongest signal always wins. And the strongest signal is almost always the one repeated for years, not the one imagined for 5 minutes. Mental sovereignty begins when these narratives are recognized as code rather than identity. The moment a limiting belief is seen in real time, distance forms around it. The story stops feeling like truth and starts looking like inherited conditioning. Awareness can finally intervene, rewriting the message instead of reacting to it. This shift turns the mind from an enemy into a tool. As attention stabilizes, reality becomes easier to read. Emotional states reveal the quality of the broadcast. Outcomes reflect inner alignment. A thought repeated with conviction reshapes behavior and possibility. This is the stage where many feel the first genuine wave of empowerment. And it often becomes the moment they decide to stay in the journey. If they haven't yet, this is where saving the video helps reinforce the learning later. But stage 3 comes with a hidden consequence. The mind becomes louder before it becomes clear. Thoughts start pushing back when their authority is challenged. Old identities resist being rewritten. And this resistance naturally opens the doorway to the next phase, the realm where energy itself becomes unmistakably real. As mental noise settles and clarity increases, perception begins to widen beyond thought. It becomes clear that emotions carry weight, rooms carry atmospheres, and people carry fields. This sensitivity arrives gradually, then all at once. Awareness starts detecting tension, density, or openness without needing explanations. A new dimension of experience reveals itself. Energy stops being a metaphor and becomes a felt reality. A conversation shifts the body's temperature. A memory collapses or expands the chest. A person's presence either drains or replenishes. None of this is imagined. It is data the nervous system was always receiving but never fully interpreting. Stage 4 begins the moment this data is recognized as legitimate. The subtle bodies emerge as frameworks, not theories. The etheric layer reveals itself through vitality or fatigue that appears before any physical symptom. The emotional layer becomes obvious through atmospheres that linger after interactions. The mental layer shows its influence when focused intention reaches someone before words do. It becomes evident that experience is shaped from the inside out. As awareness sharpens, cause and effect look different. A single thought shifts the emotional field. A breath alters internal coherence. A gentle intention calms someone across the room before anything is spoken. Reality begins responding with noticeable speed. Energy communicates faster than language, and the body starts learning to interpret these currents. The heightened sensitivity can feel electrifying. Creativity rises. Intuition becomes precise. Choices feel guided. Yet this expansion comes with consequences. The field becomes more open, more permeable, more noticeable. What once seemed like coincidence begins to feel like interaction. And with every expansion, new influences appear, both supportive and destabilizing. The increase in energy naturally exposes a hidden dynamic. Openness invites exchange. Some exchanges uplift, others overwhelm. The system reacts strongly because the field is now bright enough to be felt by more than just the person experiencing it. And that brightness leads directly into the next challenge, where power meets vulnerability, and visibility attracts pressure. Stage 4's expansion points straight into the tension of Stage 5. As sensitivity heightens, something unexpected happens. The field becomes more porous than before. Openness brings clarity, but it also brings vulnerability. Emotional currents that once went unnoticed now feel overwhelming. Environments that used to feel neutral now leave a mark. It becomes clear that expansion without grounding can destabilize more than it liberates. With increased perception comes increased influence. Energy moves faster through intention, but outside energy also moves faster into the system. Emotional residue from others lingers longer. Conflicts absorb more fully. Compassion turns into over-responsibility. What feels like helping often becomes energetic depletion. The very sensitivity that elevates awareness begins to drain it. Another shift becomes visible. Brightness attracts attention. Not literal attention, but energetic recognition. The field stands out in a way it didn't before. Patterns respond. People react. Circumstances tighten. The system seems to pull on anything that rises too quickly. It's not malicious, it's regulatory. Heightened coherence disrupts equilibrium, and equilibrium tries to reassert itself. This visibility often brings new forms of resistance. Unexpected tension enters relationships. Old triggers resurface sharply. Random setbacks cluster in ways that feel strangely intentional. Awareness starts noticing how quickly emotional atmosphere changes when boundaries are unclear. Without grounding, energy bends under pressure instead of holding its shape. This is where many feel the first real impulse to retreat. Yet this stage also reveals something important. Personal power requires containment. Sensitivity without discipline becomes overload. Influence without boundaries becomes chaos. It becomes obvious that the field must learn insulation, not isolation. Strength is not in shutting out the world, but in regulating contact with it. And understanding this is often the moment someone decides to keep going. Saving the video here helps them return when the journey gets overwhelming. As these pressures intensify, a deeper pattern emerges. Everything that destabilizes seems designed to test whether awareness can remain stable while expanding. The pressure points are not random, they are thresholds. And the moment these thresholds appear, the stage shifts once again into a realm where resistance becomes explicit, concentrated, and unavoidable. This is the doorway into stage 5. As energy heightens and coherence increases, pressure begins to rise from all directions. The shift is sudden and unmistakable. Situations that were stable start wobbling. Relationships that felt predictable become reactive. Events cluster in ways that feel engineered to break momentum. It becomes clear that stage 5 brings resistance, not because of failure, but because of progress. The first wave appears through people. Emotional demands increase. Old patterns resurface. Someone's growth disrupts unspoken agreements, and those around them instinctively try to pull them back into familiar versions of themselves. This isn't intentional, it's energetic gravity. The field seeks familiarity. Anyone rising too fast becomes a mirror others aren't ready to face. The second wave arrives through life events. Technology fails at the worst moments. Finances tighten unexpectedly. Health dips without clear cause. Responsibilities multiply. It feels as if external reality is trying to drag awareness back into survival mode. The timing is too precise to dismiss. Once noticed, the pattern is impossible to unsee. The third wave emerges internally. Doubt sharpens. Old fears speak louder. Thoughts feel borrowed rather than organic. Narratives appear that weren't present before. Maybe this is too much, maybe none of this is real, maybe normalcy would be easier. These thoughts behave like programs seeking to restabilize the old identity. Their goal is not clarity, it's regression. Recognizing the pattern weakens its grip. Once the structure of the 3 attacks becomes visible, pressure no longer feels personal. It becomes a threshold, not a punishment. Awareness realizes that resistance intensifies because coherence is increasing. This shift often brings a moment of clarity, one that's worth saving the video for, because stage 5 breaks almost everyone who faces it unprepared. Yet the battleground serves a purpose. It tests whether awareness can stay aligned while everything pulls it sideways. It tests whether growth is a preference or a commitment. And once someone sees this clearly, the next stage begins revealing itself quietly, promising peace, spaciousness, and dissolution. This is the gateway into stage 6. When the battleground quiets, an entirely different quality of experience emerges. Boundaries dissolve. Thoughts lose their sharp edges. Identity softens until it feels transparent. Awareness expands into everything it touches, as if the world were breathing through it. This state feels like truth, deep, clean, liberating. Time behaves differently here. Minutes stretch into eternity. Ordinary sounds become spacious. The sense of I becomes diffuse, almost vapor-like. This is often interpreted as awakening reaching its destination. Yet something subtle reveals itself. Transcendence is magnificent, but it's still a state, temporary, delicate, dependent on stillness. The illusion appears when unity is mistaken for completion. Many retreat into silence to preserve the feeling. Bills, relationships, responsibilities begin to feel heavy or irrelevant. The world looks noisy compared to the purity of transcendence. It becomes clear that unity can become a hiding place. What feels like enlightenment can quietly turn into avoidance. Some attempt to chase the state, hoping for permanent ego dissolution. Retreats, rituals, medicine, long meditations, each one offers a taste, but none can be held inside daily life. The nervous system wasn't designed to float indefinitely. Without integration, unity becomes a souvenir rather than a foundation. This realization alone changes everything. Others freeze in transcendence, trying to stay untouched by the world. Functionality declines. Preferences fade. Ambition disappears. Without noticing, life begins collapsing, not expanding. The body remains on earth while identity drifts elsewhere. It becomes evident that transcendence without embodiment weakens rather than strengthens. This is the silent trap of stage 6, and one worth saving for later reflection. Yet this stage holds a crucial key. The spaciousness, the clarity, the dissolving of boundaries, all of it becomes essential for what comes next. Because once the beauty of unity stops being the goal and starts becoming a tool, something extraordinary becomes possible. And that possibility opens directly into stage 7. When unity stops being an escape and starts becoming a foundation, a new kind of stability appears. Awareness stretches across the physical and the infinite at the same time. The body feels grounded while consciousness feels limitless. Nothing needs to be rejected or transcended. Everything belongs. This is the first unmistakable signal of stage 7. In this stage, identity reorganizes itself. The human self is no longer the cage, it becomes the interface. Emotions are no longer interruptions, they become data. Thoughts are not threats, they are tools. The physical world stops feeling like a distraction and starts functioning as a canvas. Life becomes coherent because separation is no longer the operating system. Here, all 7 stages operate simultaneously. Physical reality provides structure. Duality provides polarity. Mind provides direction. Energy provides leverage. Protection provides boundaries. Unity provides perspective. Integration weaves them into a single state of being. It becomes clear that power is not intensity, it's alignment. Creation accelerates because there is no inner contradiction. Intention flows cleanly through emotion into action. Resistance dissolves faster. Opportunities appear with unusual timing. Communication becomes sharper. Even conflict feels purposeful. The sense of working against life disappears. Everything begins to move as one system, not many. It's at this point that sharing the video helps others understand what this state actually means. In stage 7, the ego is not eliminated, it is repurposed. It becomes a lens rather than a prison. Desire becomes navigation, not temptation. Fear becomes information, not paralysis. Shadow becomes fuel, not shame. Every aspect of the human system is reclaimed as part of the expression rather than something to transcend. The person becomes both the ocean and the wave simultaneously. This integration dissolves the final illusion. Awakening was never about leaving the human experience. It was about inhabiting it fully, consciously, deliberately. When this truth stabilizes, a new question appears naturally: what inner shifts make this state sustainable, repeatable, and practical? The answer leads directly into stage 7's 3 core transformat, ions. The first shift becomes visible when escaping the physical no longer feels like progress. Presence returns to the body with new meaning. Sensation becomes grounding rather than confinement. Breath stops being automatic and becomes intentional. It becomes clear that true influence begins where full embodiment begins. The body reveals itself as an alchemical instrument rather than an obstacle. Muscles, nerves, breath, and heartbeat function like levers inside matter. Awareness starts noticing that physical participation amplifies spiritual clarity rather than diminishing it. Life moves differently when consciousness occupies every cell. Integration begins where avoidance ends. The second shift emerges through shadow. What was previously rejected now appears as raw material. Anger becomes fuel for boundary. Fear becomes guidance for precision. Desire becomes directional intelligence. Nothing requires exile. Everything becomes usable. This shift dissolves the split between light and dark and replaces it with depth. Polarity becomes functional. Emotions stop being moral categories and become navigational data. The inner system aligns because nothing fights itself anymore. Creative energy stops leaking into suppression and begins flowing into creation. This inner coherence stabilizes growth. It's often here that someone feels compelled to like or save the video simply to anchor the insight. The third shift reveals the most radical truth. Consciousness is not visiting the human experience, it is expressing as it. Awareness no longer says, "I am observing this human," but "I am choosing to express through this human." Identity expands without abandoning the individual form. The infinite and the finite stop competing and begin co-authoring reality. These three shifts mark the threshold of sustainable awakening. They are not philosophical ideals, they are lived transformations. And as these transformations stabilize, something inevitable rises, the need for a hook powerful enough to open the entire journey in seconds. That opening moment comes next. Everything you've seen here points to a single truth: your next level won't appear until you choose it. The moment you act from awareness instead of habit, the entire map shifts beneath your feet. What's the one change you're ready to make today? And which stage do you sense yourself entering now? If this opens something in you, subscribe so you don't lose the momentum, like and share to expand this field, and turn on notifications so you don't slip back into the old layers. When you're ready, the next video on your screen takes you deeper into the mechanics of real power. Follow it and keep rising.